Going from the lone supernova bright spot in the game's maps to the depressingly dark side of the game's maps, this video is going to cover what I've classified under the horrible tier. If you haven't watched the introduction video, I strongly suggest you do that, or else you might get lost on the reasons why some of these maps are just so god-awful. But not just god-awful, these are the maps that weren't just bad in theory, or bad in design, or bad in functionality. No, these are the maps that should have been aborted from the very beginning. These are the maps that have no redeeming qualities whatsoever. These are the maps that single-handedly make everything else wrong with the game's maps seem like acceptable flaws because they're not as bad as these maps. These are the maps that make Danny J look like a halfway decent Monday Night Combat player, and Lord knows that's a near impossible feat. Actually, I lied. The worst map in the game has two redeeming qualities. It has a cedar, and it has an arcade. But since neither of those have to do with the flow plus balance equals delicious pie map theory I explained in the first video, they don't get to count. In case you realize Gears 2 for the steaming pile of shit it was early on and can't think of what map has a cedar and an arcade, that map is Day 1. Day 1 is pretty much the best example I can give of why asymmetrical maps don't work in Gears of War. I think Epic thought they were being clever by making a map that looked kind of asymmetrical, and then believed they were making a map with some form of symmetry, but fucked up the spawn point so badly they wound up making a map that couldn't be any more asymmetrical while still actually having middle sections of the map. That's not really the problem though. The problem is that the map finds a way to play completely different when you have people who are playing by themselves or just not knowing what they're doing, versus what happens when you have people who are playing with a team. With one scenario, you have a race to power weapons where the biggest battle is against your own fucking teammates, while the other side of the strategic coin is one where it's so easy to stop people from running to their supposedly free power weapon that sending anyone over to the bad side is just suicide. Neither sounds really all that appetizing from a balance perspective. And that's just the map balance. God forbid I actually try to explain how the map works in my relation to my little trio of map flow theory balance thing, because the only way I won't spend an hour explaining it is by basically saying the three don't fucking coexist at all. There's no trade-off between them at any point. The gameplay goes from being overly teamwork oriented to overly power weapon oriented to overly map control oriented, and there isn't any actual blending of those game mechanics which is necessary for anything to be balanced or to flow. Well, now that I've gotten the hatred for Day 1 out of my system, it's time to move on to the other 5 maps in the ridiculous pieces of shredded shit tier. I want to start with the map that I almost didn't put in the tier because for some reason people seem to like this map. I wound up going back, watching some gameplay of the map, and all it really did was reaffirm my feeling that the majority of people are batshit crazy. That map's Ruins. This is something you're going to hear me mention a lot when any Gears 2 map gets brought up, but holy shit, Epic, 10 players cannot fit in 2 goddamn choke points. I really don't get how you can go from a game like Gears 1 that usually had 3 to 4 choke points on a map in a 4v4 game to a game like Gears 2 where you add more players, take away choke points. It makes no fucking sense, and I want to murder the idea. It actually makes me frustrated just thinking about it. I think my head's about to pop from thinking about maps that are made that way. Of course, if you want me to get technical about why Ruins blows diseased monkey cock, we can always go back to my little trio of teamwork, power weapons, and map control. Let's start with the one that matters the most, teamwork. The map has none. Teamwork can just as easily be defined on this map as sitting in the back of your spawn with rifles as it can be throwing smokes onto the other team's side of the bridge and rushing in. Simply put, there is no possibility of actual teamwork on the map. There are no viable angles, there are no open areas. It's about 5 long, narrow corridors that all get raped by stopping power and planted grenades. Then there's power weapons, which, God forbid, like I said, found a way to turn the 2 choke points into essentially 0 with a planted grenade that can be anywhere and be borderline invisible with how brown this fucking map is, making you have to use your own grenades just to clear out the other team's grenades, leaving you with nothing to actually push in with. Oh yeah, the map has no fucking power weapon in its center point either. Wait, yes it does. It's a scorcher of all weapons. Not that you'll ever be able to make any use of it, since picking it up would it'd be like waving a gigantic banner screaming "Snipe me," which leads us to map control, where the only point on the map that could even be classified as an advantage to hold is that same spot where you're holding a gigantic banner screaming "Snipe me" the whole time you sit there. Well, now that that's out of the way, I can move on to the maps in the tier that are bad just because they let a trio of the piece get way too out of control powerful, as opposed to there being an absence of any kind of coherent map flow. First up is Rooftops. How you can put 9 weapons on a map and only have one of them matter, which happens to be a weapon both teams spawn with, is beyond my comprehension. I don't know how many people watching this have ever played a game battles match on Rooftops, but it basically went like this. One guy on each team that studied every geometrical hammer drop angle picks 1 to 3 spots to play from. The guys with hammers have a little laser tag war for about 4 minutes and 15 seconds with their scoreboard glued to their screen, so they know every single time they actually hit someone a little bit and got 1 point of damage. Then one team rushes to the other team's side, hoping they can find everybody without getting raped by the gigantic laser that, by the way, obliterated 99% of the game's population. That goes on for about 45 minutes to an hour before someone finally wins 5 rounds. Then you get to do it all over again because you were the dickhead that chose Rooftops on their host, so now they need to do it back to you. Anyway, the map has absolutely no flow. The few places on the map that can be considered map control are able to be hit from anywhere by Hammer of Dawn, so those are all worthless. Teamwork is completely thrown out of the question because everything is controlled by one guy on each team, while the other 3 players finger their asshole near spawn hoping they don't get hammered, and despite there being 9 weapons placed on the map, and 7 of them being genuinely good weapons, grenades, snipers, Hammer of Dawns, and torque bows, only 2 of them matter, the 2 Hammer of Dawns. When I mentioned maps can last an average of 45 minutes, that should have been a decent hint that the map doesn't flow whatsoever. It also doesn't help that the map has one extremely small choke point either, but I can't even explain how that shit happened, so I'm just going to stop talking about Rooftops before my head explodes. This map is pretty much the reason why the Hammer of Dawn had to suck in Gears 2 and 3. On to the other 2 maps that get dominated by one aspect of my little trio of game mechanics are 2 maps that pretty much everyone watching understands how bad they are, mainly because they're in Gears 3 and one of them had to be removed from the game's map cycle by the developers. Those 2 maps are Overpass and Sandbar. They both suffer from exactly the same problem, a single point of map control on the map with a narrow straightaway to get where people are going to be abusing the control point from. This works about as well as a 2 choke point map with 8 sets of frag grenades on it. While Overpass is clearly the worst map between the 2, I'm putting Sandbar further down the shit list for really just one reason and one reason only. Quinn Del Hoyo apparently designed this map. Keep in mind, this is one of the amazingly intelligent people who came up with the Zeta playlist. You know, that thing that I've called the best thing to happen to Gears of War since Gears of War 1. This is one of the few guys from Epic who have actively supported Gears on a competitive level. And yet, somehow, someway, this guy created Sandbar. That's like if you told me the guy that made War Machine also made the sawed-off shotgun. It just doesn't make any sense how someone can do something so good and so bad within a, year time frame. It doesn't make sense to me. And then finally we have Fuel Station, the only DLC map that found its way into the horrible tier. I don't know what's worse about Fuel Station, the fact that there's basically no meaningful power weapons on the map to pick up that can actually change the pace of the game, or the fact that where you spawn pretty much automatically chooses where you're going to go on the map and what you're going to do. All I know is that the only thing worse than that is how the only real area of map control on this entire map has 2 extremely long ways to get to the top, meaning one team takes control and dominates the rest of the round. Actually, there is something worse than all 3 of those things. If you don't get the spawn that gives you that unbreakable castle of a tower, you get spawned on a side of the map with explodable trucks that are not only going to kill you, but might just ragdoll you 50 feet away as you come out of spawn. That's what I like to call balance. If there's anything to take away from how bad some of the maps in Gears have been, it's that at least Epic restrained themselves from making total retard decisions constantly with the DLC maps for the most part. The only one that I can really say is a total failure is Fuel Station, which out of 40 maps is a pretty decent accomplishment. It means that they know how to assess what makes certain kinds of maps play decently, and certain other maps play like a dog chasing its tail.
Get me more ammunition. Human spotted. Revive me. I'm down. One less to pollute our world. Get me more ammunition. Why won't this work properly? Human spotted. Excellent. Target my mark. Incoming smoke. Check your aim.